Welcome back to the Prado Museum for another of our weekly sessions in English that are made possible with the help of the members of the American Friends of the Prado Museum. Today we're going to be looking at these fascinating paintings by Albrecht Dürer of Adam and Eve. These are really the culmination of his life of studies and an interest in the human body and in proportions. We can tell that they're Adam and Eve, we can see the serpent and the apple, these things that tell us who these people are, but these really are almost like accessories. They're just excuses to paint these beautiful studies of the human form. Dürer was born in Nuremberg in 1471, and he was the third of 18 children. And his father was a metal worker, so you can imagine that he did a lot of work helping his father, which would have helped his training when he was young. We have an image of his wonderful self-portrait here as well. Dürer was really fascinated with a few different things all throughout his life, and one of them is the image of himself. We actually have an enormous number of self-portraits of Dürer. And his other fascination is with the human body. And at least one time he combined these two ideas, and we do actually have a nude self-portrait of Dürer, which is something that's really original for the end of the 15th and the beginning of the 16th century. For Dürer, like other humanists at his time, traveling outside his hometown, traveling outside his country was essential for his education. It was a way to broaden your horizons and to grow artistically. And he goes to a lot of different places, and one of them is to Venice. He goes to Venice at least twice, or he goes to Venice twice. And the first time is in 1494. And this is when he begins to learn the theories behind Italian painting, which make an enormous impact on him, on Dürer, on this German artist. There's actually a curious anecdote from Dürer who says that in the town of Nuremberg there was an Italian painter who was called Jacopo da Barberi, and Barberi, he says, was very knowledgeable about proportions, that he had a great understanding of human proportions, but also that Barberi had a lot of secrets that he wouldn't tell Dürer. And so Dürer had to pursue these investigations, to do these studies really on his own. And he returns to the idea of the human figure so many times throughout his career in engravings, and we can see male figures and female figures, and in all sorts of different gestures and all sorts of different positions. And you can even see throughout the progression of his engravings when he's begun to see classical sculpture, when we start to use this idea of contrapposto that we can see here in Eve, this graceful shifting of weight that gives her this natural, lifelike appearance, this graceful, elegant S shape in her body. And he comes back to this idea of the human figure several times through the subject of Adam and Eve. And here we can see another relief of the same subject in Adam and Eve that is based on the engraving that he did in 1504, just a few years before he did this painting. Near the end of his life, Dürer also wrote several books sharing his knowledge about his studies of the body, of proportions, books on a manual of measurement, on how to use the compass, on how to use different tools and mathematics to study the human body, and also books directly on human proportion. Actually, in this room, we have another object that's really interesting, which is a mannequin, an articulated mannequin, which we believe was probably part of Dürer's workshop. And you can imagine him manipulating this little mannequin, this little doll, with all of its articulations and all of its joints to help study proportion and also study gesture and movement. So in 1504, he makes this wonderful engraving of Adam and Eve, and then in the engraving we see all of this lush forest and background that later, when he paints this in 1507, he's eliminated. He's eliminated all of this vegetation in the back, all of this reference to the Garden of Eden, except the essential elements of the apple and the serpent. And this stark, elegant, dark background really makes these bodies stand out and really doesn't distract us from anything except the interest in the human body. So we can really see his evolution in his interest in studying the human body in these 3 years. These bodies are based on a canon of 9 heads. The height of the bodies is based on 9 heads, which is slightly elongated to classical proportions. Classical proportions originally talked about 7 heads, and then Vitruvius tells us that classical proportions should be based on 8 heads. And Dürer is slightly lengthening this a bit, which might make us think at the beginning of mannerism, and then artists that would follow him that also elongated their figures, like Parmigianino or like El Greco. But the effect, the visual effect, when you're standing here in front of these actually is one of complete coherence and harmony. They're absolutely beautiful. And we can also see this evolution from his engravings to these paintings here of a much more naturalistic definition of the anatomy. In fact, we can actually think of these paintings as sort of a synthesis between Dürer's upbringing in the German world of painting, the German tradition of painting, which we can see with the chromatism, for instance, with the color, with the 2 different tonalities that are used for Adam's body and then for Eve's body, and then also in the level of detail, the detail which I'll just going to point out just one, because I mean there's so many details that we could focus on here. But if you notice, just above Eve's hand, there's a single strand of her hair. So this attention to detail, which would be representative of his German tradition of painting. It's absolutely beautiful, and a beautiful hand there. And then from the Italian side, from the Italian influence in this painting, we have all of the monumentality, all of the naturalness, all of the naturalism. So they're absolutely beautiful paintings. They're really the culmination of the life of this fascinating painter who's of insatiable curiosity, of his life dedicated to research, to study of the human body, and of course of extraordinary talent. And if you're interested in knowing more about these paintings, I also want to tell you that there is a conference. It's available in Spanish by Paloma Malaga. I'm sure that you remember the name Paloma Malaga from other videos on the Prado's website, where you can learn all about these paintings as well. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.